Welcome. Welcome to Vanadium. I'm Chris Rankin. The more I learn about this mad world, the more mysterious it seems. In May 1962, 4 U.S. Army soldiers walked into a simulated communications room, outfitted with a radio, maps, food, water, and a chemical toilet. The 4 men were told they would be taking part in a training exercise that would last 72 hours. There was something kept secret from the soldiers. They were being lied to. This wasn't a training exercise. This was an experiment. 3 of these men were exposed, without their knowledge, to extremely high doses of the most powerful, dangerous, and mysterious hallucinogenic drug in the pharmacopoeia, BZ. It's something very few chemists have even heard of. 3-quinculinyl benzilate. This is a weapon, an incapacitating agent that makes LSD, PCP, and mushrooms seem like varieties of herbal tea. This isn't stuff you can find on the black market, or even in the darkest of the darkest recesses of the dark web for that matter. BZ never caught on. It never became a thing. Anyone who was ever exposed ended up too terrified to relive the experience, many of them stating the effects were too awful, even for use in warfare, on the enemy. Even for those with an interest in extreme and exotic drugs, even for the suicidal and certifiably insane, BZ never developed a fan base. That fact speaks to BZ's merciless effects. The story of this drug was the basis for the legendary horror hallucinogen in the movie Jacob's Ladder. If you're searching for an anti-drug movie, look no further than Jacob's Ladder. That's enough to scare anyone away from hallucinogenic compounds. There are only a few scientists and researchers on Earth interested in 3-quinculinyl benzilate. And there was one man, a psychiatrist, who took BZ research as far as it could go. U.S. Army researcher James Ketchum was born in Manhattan and attended Dartmouth College before receiving his undergraduate degree from Columbia in 1952. In 1956, he received his MD from Cornell. He joined the Army later that year, and after a residency at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center in D.C., he was granted board certification in psychiatry and joined the researchers at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. In 1960, Ketchum agreed to an unconventional assignment at the Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland and started looking into potential incapacitating agents, including LSD and cannabis derivatives. Ketchum also branched out and started looking in new directions. He wasn't satisfied with the severity of the usual mind-altering compounds. He was searching for something unconventional, something much more powerful. At around the same time, the Swiss pharmaceutical company Hoffmann La Roche was investigating antispasmodic agents, similar to atropine, for treating gastrointestinal ailments when they discovered BZ. It was being looked at for possible use in ulcer treatment, and although it showed some potential in that regard, it was deemed unsuitable by the company, and all research was eventually scrapped. It turned out BZ was causing severe hallucinations and mental distress in the trials. This news of these unusual side effects caught the interest of Dr. James Ketchum. Ketchum wanted to test the effects of this 3-quinculinyl benzilate, or BZ. As one of the most powerful anticholinergic agents, BZ produces a cascade of effects known as Anticholinergic Toxidrome. These include both psychological and physiological effects, with the most incapacitating effect being a state of profound delirium, characterized by cognitive dysfunction, hallucinations, and the inability to perform basic functions. The usual constellation of physical anticholinergic effects is also present, including extreme pupil dilation, potentially to the point of temporary blindness, increased heart rate, reddening skin through dermal vasodilation, dry mouth, and hyperthermia. The easily observable symptoms of the anticholinergic toxidrome are famously characterized by the mnemonic, mad as a hatter, red as a beet, dry as a bone, and blind as a bat. BZ is odorless, has only a slightly bitter taste, and is non-irritating with delayed symptoms appearing several hours after contact. It was originally titled the badass-sounding TK, but when it was standardized by the Army in 1961, it received the NATO codename BZ. The agent commonly became known as Buzz because of this abbreviation and the effects it had on the mental state of the human volunteers. Although, Buzz doesn't seem like an adequate description based on the accounts I've come across. 3-quinnuclidyl benzilate, BZ, is a Frankenstein monster version of drugs inspired by those from the natural world. Plants of the deadly nightshade family, Solanaceae, contain various anticholinergic tropane alkaloids, such as scopolamine, atropine, and hyoscyamine. BZ is a weaponized form of these ancient natural compounds. In 1962, James Ketchum was ready to go with BZ. The Army was ready to see how their new monster, once unleashed, might affect enemy operations. That May, they allowed Ketchum to create the fake communications outpost and drug the 4 subjects. The volunteers were told they would be taking part in a training exercise. The experiment began on a Friday morning and continued for 72 hours. During these 72 hours, the men responded in various degrees, according to the quantity of the drug they had been given. The leader of the group, identified only as L in Ketchum's book, was given a placebo dose and spent most of the first 36 hours keeping the soldier who had received the highest dose from hurting himself and others. PFC, Ronald Zadrozny, an Army intelligence officer, got the largest dose. Zadrozny received a delirium-inducing dose of BZ. Within 2 hours of his arrival, he needed the assistance of L just to stand up, and he would push away anyone who tried to help. The Army wasn't just interested in the direct effects of the drug. Ketchum and the researchers wanted to see how it impacted the function of the organization. The 4-man team was given missions, primarily compiling and disseminating radio information to various staged outposts and even a fake headquarters. L would handle nearly all of these tasks, while H and C read or slept. Zadrozny, once he could stand and walk around, spent most of the weekend staring into the camera lenses whenever they were exposed, and made several attempts to escape the locked area. Under the influence of BZ, he paced the walls of the outpost, checking for exits. Sometimes, then he would grab his hat and jacket, put them on, tell the rest of the men goodbye, and attempt to leave through the door. Every time he found it locked, he would get confused and try the handle repeatedly. He even attempted an escape through a medicine cabinet until H finally stopped him. Finally, he began another repetition, started again by putting his hat and jacket on and saying goodbye to everyone yet again. Eventually, the BZ wore off and the 72-hour experiment ended. The team was released back to the barracks, left with very little information about what had happened and some truly odd stories from the Cold War. Ketchum and the Army were intrigued by the results and interested in going even further. Their studies showed some aspects of BZ made it a good choice for a weapon. Most other psychoactive drugs have extremely variable effects in different people and under different circumstances. Ketchum's tests suggest this isn't the case with BZ. In terms of the overwhelming effects, BZ is quite reliable. Individuals receiving the LD50 or higher dose almost always develop the full syndrome of delirium. Ketchum's work shows there is surprisingly little variation among individuals when anticholinergics are administered. This may be because these deadly nightshade family drugs operate more directly on the hardware of the brain, neuron systems where on or off activity is more the predominant characteristic. Drugs such as LSD or the amphetamines, for example, act on serotonin or dopamine. They aren't like BZ. These more familiar, conventional psychoactive drugs are more modulatory rather than discrete in their actions, meaning the strength of their effects vary in accordance with the prevailing mood, arousal level, and psychological state of the subject. Anticholinergics like BZ seem to act on the deep, hardware functions of the mind. With full delirium, the individual seems to be in a waking dream, often staring and muttering, sometimes shouting, as simple items in the environment are often perceived as elaborate and animate structures, creatures, and people. Another striking characteristic of this delirium is the fluctuation in intensity from moment to moment, with occasionally lucid intervals. An intoxicated individual might answer Shakespeare when asked who wrote Hamlet, but when asked the same question 5 minutes later, might get down on the floor, remove their clothes, and defecate. Also, repetitive phantom behaviors, such as plucking or picking at the air or their garments, is characteristic. This is the origin of the old term wool gathering. Recovery from anticholinergic drug delirium is gradual. The spectacular hallucinations are gradually replaced by more and more modest distortions. For example, instead of large animals, mice and insects are described by the subject as the level of the drug subsides. Awareness and insight gradually begin to return. Surprisingly, paranoid tendencies often emerge at this stage as the subject senses that something is amiss, suspects someone, but cannot carry out a full course of reasoning. After this, a long period of restorative sleep generally precedes the return to normal cognitive function. James Ketchum's autobiographical book, Chemical Warfare: Secrets Almost Forgotten, from 2006, describes a scheme to incapacitate an entire trawler with aerosolized BZ. This effort was given the cute title, Project Dork. BZ was ultimately weaponized for delivery in an M43 cluster bomb until all stocks were reportedly destroyed in 1989. This was part of a general downsizing of the US chemical warfare program. BZ's story should have ended when all the stockpiles of the weapon were destroyed, but it turns out this wasn't the end for BZ. In February 1998, the British Ministry of Defense accused Iraq of having stockpiled large amounts of a mysterious anticholinergic incapacitating agent known as Agent 15. Agent 15 was likely to be chemically identical or closely related to BZ. Agent 15 was reportedly stockpiled in large quantities prior to and during the Persian Gulf War. However, after the war, the CIA concluded that Iraq had not stockpiled or weaponized the compound. In January 2013, an unidentified U.S. administration official claimed that a Syrian contact made a compelling case that Agent 15, or BZ, was being used in Homs. However, in response to these reports, the U.S. National Security Council spokesman stated, "The reporting we have seen from media sources regarding alleged chemical weapon incidents in Syria have not been consistent with what we believe to be true about the Syrian chemical weapons program." It's not a very firm denial. There are some experiences far worse, far more terrifying than death. Even something temporary can leave an enduring traumatic impression, a painful, permanent distortion, perhaps worse than no conscious existence at all. Some things make death appear gentle. BZ is one of them. This is from Jacob's Ladder. If you're afraid of dying and you're holding on, you'll see devils tearing your life away. But if you've made your peace, then the devils are really angels, freeing you from the world. It all depends on how you look at it. Thank you very much. This was Chris Rankin with Vanadium.